Illusion and Incompetence. Harris Maine arrived at the Fortune 500 headquarters like a promise in a pressed suit, tidy, improbably confident, carrying a dossier that smelled faintly of coffee and luck. He talked in the cadence of someone who knows power loves certainty. Miranda LaRue, the CEO, listened and appointed him executive assistant, an ambiguous title that meant he managed miracles and minor catastrophes. Harris had fabricated everything useful about himself: a degree from a school he'd never attended, references that were names and echoes, a certificate of systems integration purchased at midnight. He trimmed his past to a neat silhouette. People preferred silhouettes: less mess, fewer questions. At first, his deception was convenient. He scheduled investor calls with military punctuality. He curated Miranda's calendar as if it were sacred. He introduced efficiencies with a confident shrug: automated folders, templated replies, a spreadsheet that made numbers line up. Superiors noticed. They told each other Harris had an instinct for operations. He smiled and learned how to smile like a believer. He became a virtuoso of plausible detail. If a question required knowledge, he deployed a tactical glossary. Terms like scalable synergies and operational cadence that made people stop asking for facts and start nodding. Once, preparing Miranda for a gala, he rewrote anecdotes to land faster. He also mistyped blockchain as blackchain in 3 teleprompter lines. Miranda said it. The reporters, starved for novelty, called it an audacious. The resume admired at cocktail parties was often a performance. He loved spectacle. His tactics were unscrupulous. People who benefited called him cunning, those who didn't called him lucky. But he also made incompetent technical errors. He printed confidential reports double-sided, with pages out of order, turning financials into an avant-garde novella. He labeled a folder "Final, Do Not Open," and put inside the wrong investor forecast. At a retreat, he presented a slide he called an emotional histogram, a bar chart with captions like "Team Morale Peak, Q2," and watched senior leaders applaud because it read like conviction rather than data. Small miracles compounded into respect. Senior vice presidents asked for his help. A board member complimented his impeccable instincts. Another hailed him as indispensable after Harris arranged a last-minute charter that saved a deal. He rose because people equated smoothness with skill. Performance built on omission is brittle. Errors began as tiny, explainable accidents. A breakfast meeting booked for 8 p.m. instead of 8 a.m. An investor email sent to all rather than select. Each mishap landed like confetti, annoying and forgettable until they multiplied. The first public collapse came at a webcast. Harris had reassured everyone the slides were uploaded to the secure cloud. Miranda took the stage. 5 minutes in, the presentation cursor blinked at a black screen. Harris fumbled with the console, barked at IT to restore the backup, and then admitted the backup belonged to a trial account, long expired. The webcast stuttered into awkward conversation. A junior analyst, grateful for Harris's earlier help, casually asked where Harris had studied systems integration. Harris named an Ivy that appeared on his dossier. The analyst Googled. One search led to another. The resume admired at cocktail parties was unraveled by hyperlinks. A recruiter posted the certificates to a forum with a note: "Anyone know if these are real?" The post spread. Harris tried deflection, jokes, lunches, favors. He catered events, upgraded hotels, rescued visas. People forgave until they counted. A CFO who had trusted him opened invoices and found sloppy signatures and generic vendor emails. Questions multiplied. Three calamities stacked at the annual board review. Harris, juggling a panic, spilled coffee and flipped the wrong switch. The lights stuttered, the teleprompter froze, and a pre-recorded CEO video played audio from a staff karaoke night. Laughter roared, not from humor, but disbelief. When the board requested verification of credentials, an HR investigator tracked emails and logs. The certificates were traced to a service that produced printable honors for a fee. The supposed references included a tech journalist's name, not a former manager. Miranda, who had promoted him, asked questions that required answers Harris did not have. He could not replace silence with swagger. He had no apprenticeship to show, he had only improvised competence. The response was awkwardly humane. Miranda called a company meeting. Harris stood at the podium and admitted his falsifications. He said, "I promised certainty and delivered an illusion. I am sorry." Murmurs rose, scandal mixed with pity. Some felt cheated, others oddly felt relieved. Truth, even messy, repaired something. HR negotiated an exit, severance, and a non-disparagement clause. Harris took the check like a small absolution. On his last day, he packed his stapler and a succulent he had named leadership. In the elevator, a junior executive he had once helped said, "You did teach me something about anticipating needs." Harris smiled honestly and left. Outside, the city air tasted indifferent, efficient for dissolving reputations. He walked away with fewer illusions, and for the first time, a plan that was not performance, to actually learn. That night at a cheap bar, he thumbed through articles. He was a cautionary anecdote, a punchline with a moral. People debated whether he was villain or victim. He thought of Miranda's final line at the meeting. "We all bluff. The difference is whether we learn." Harris decided to learn. He would start small. Time zones, cloud subscriptions, reading data without inventing names for charts. The idea was humble and slow, and that was the point. Illusion had carried him up the elevator. Incompetence had sent him down. The tragedy was lost trust. The comedy was social and sharp. The industry would gossip, rewrite, forget. Harris walked toward the bus stop and felt a sliver of curiosity. Perhaps it was enough to begin, quietly.